Hi, folks. How is everybody doing? So, look, man, we've discussed some issues that are affecting South Africa in relation to what is needed, what needs to be done in order to turn this ship around. And we've looked at energy infrastructure, we've looked at road infrastructure, we've looked at water infrastructure and investment for those things. We've looked at railway infrastructure, we've looked at um, energy like electricity and refined petroleum products and jobs creation totaling 135,000. We've looked at the fiscal side of issues, fiscal policy like job cuts and things like that. Now I want to turn my focus on rebuilding the industrial base of South Africa, which South Africa for the longest time had a thriving industrial base and one of the few nations in the developing world that have a functional industrial base, which has then been ceded by the ANC government to the likes of China and India, Vietnam, South Korea, Singapore, and all of those other people. There's one thing that you'll realize, folks, in life, that nothing in life happens by accident. If you want something in life, you need to work for it. And sometimes you're going to have to break some bones to do it. Sometimes you're going to have to make some enemies to do it. And when it comes to taking care of your own people, you need to make bold actions. And that's exactly why, for me, I love President Donald John Trump, because he is single focused on helping America become the giant that it was known for, rebuilding the industrial base of the US, which was taken over by China by decades of being sleeping on the wheel. So one issue for now that I'm going to talk about is the issue of the pharmaceutical industry, which South Africa is probably the only, if maybe one out of three African nations who have the capacity to produce its own medicines, produce its own drugs, and that are used on the day-to-day. But we don't have a thriving such pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. It is a great shame, actually. You can look at it from the manufacturing of antiretroviral medicines, which are used by those who are HIV positive in South Africa. The medicines that are actually important are the medicines that are taken day to day for chronic illnesses like diabetes, like HIV, like depression, because those are the medicines that people will reliably be buying month to month, and they have to take a tablet or 2 or 3 every day. From the figures that we have, 77.8 million people in South Africa are living with HIV, so they have to take antiretroviral drugs. 4.5 million South Africans are living with diabetes, which means they have to take some insulin of some sort one way or the other, at least once a day or maybe once every 2 days. But I think it could be once a day, or maybe some people it's more than that. And then you have, from what some estimates are, that maybe 10% of South Africans are living with depression. And so if we say 10%, it is 10% out of 60 million people. That is 6 million South Africans have depression, which means they have to take some depression medicine in some form or the other. And this is to say, these are very, very low estimates. I'm actually cut them down. And so for me, then I even have to look at the medicines and the drugs that are used in hospitals, like morphine, like painkillers, and things like that, oncology medicines. All of these drugs that you know that they are reliably being used either in hospitals, in clinics, and their use is not periodic or sort of like haphazard, but you can sort of plot a graph in terms of how much of it is being consumed. And the issue here is that for this sort of thing, you need manufacturing plants that are sort of automated, but you need competent people to run those plants. And we have those people. We have biochemists, we have chemists, we have chemical engineers, we have industrial engineers, we have mechanical engineers. And that will also affect our automation, sort of manufacturing and automation research, which is actually currently happening at some level, maybe at UP, UFEDS. But we do have the capacity to run these high level, high skill manufacturing plants, but it's not happening. So then that's one area where the government could really say that, you know what, moving forward, because most of the people who are selling drugs all over the world, whether they're selling them in South Africa or Canada or the United States or Australia or New Zealand or the European Union, it's one or two or three companies. You can just tell them that if you want to sell your products in South Africa, these products have to be made in South Africa. And then you must impose tariffs on all of the imports of certain key drugs that you want to have actually local substitution for their manufacturing in South Africa. It's very, very important. And some of the things that will have to happen is technological investment, like adopting innovative manufacturing technologies like continuous flow synthesis, critical for production, wide-scale industrial production of drugs. Government will have to provide funding and support to the Industrial Development Corporation and to support some local research and development, which will probably happen through FEDS and UP and maybe UCT, skills developments. But this is not a big problem because South Africa already have a capable, enough trained engineers who can actually run these plants. And if there are gaps in their knowledge and experience in running this kind of manufacturing plants, they can actually get trained by others who can come into the country to do that stuff. So really, that will can reduce import dependency, and then we can increase job creation, and we can actually have self-reliance when it comes to our healthcare needs. And one of the things about having self-reliance when it comes to our healthcare needs is that it is one of the things that one could consider as national security, because if you are depending on other people to provide you critical and life-saving drugs, in matters of conflict or war, they might actually destroy your health care sector by stopping to provide you with the medicines and the drugs that you need. It is unacceptable for a country like South Africa that has the capability that South Africa has, and the know-how, and the level of universities that we have, and the kind of caliber of engineers and scientists that we have, that we're not producing our own drugs and our own medicines. And so one of the things that they could do actually that needs to be done, we can actually start by saying, because you can actually provide even these drugs to countries like Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, who have a high percentage of their populations living with HIV and diabetes and things like that. And when it comes to insulin in particular, insulin is very important for you as a country to produce locally because of how much jobs can be created by actually having insulin being produced locally. And so one of the things that will have to happen, this will have to happen in stages, where the government will pass a law and say, okay, because there are 3 stages of drug manufacturing. There is what you call the precursor chemicals. There is a manufacture of precursor chemicals which are needed to manufacture the drugs, and then from the precursor chemicals, then you manufacture advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, which are then used to manufacture the final product, which is either a liquid medicine, tablets, or capsules. So there are 3 steps of that. So what South Africa could start by saying is to say, okay, all of these drugs, the last step, which is the manufacture of the finished product, which is liquid medicine, tablets, and capsules, has to be manufactured in South Africa by 3 years from now. Say 50% of it must be manufactured in South Africa. And then you say 5 years from now, 50% of the advanced pharmaceutical ingredients and maybe 50%, 60% of the finished product must be manufactured in South Africa. And then you say 10 years from now, precursor chemicals, 50% of precursor chemicals must be manufactured in South Africa, and then 60% of the advanced pharmaceutical ingredients must be manufactured in South Africa, and somewhere around 65 to 70% of all the finished products must be manufactured in South Africa. This is something that is doable. South Africa is one of the few nations in the world that have this capacity. And one of the reasons why we are buying all of these things from China and India and Vietnam and South Korea and Japan is because we have had governments that have been asleep on the wheel. That's really why we're having this problem. It's not just a problem that is unique to South Africa, it's a problem that many European nations and Western nations have had to deal with because they've had leaders in the past who've been sleeping on the wheel, like having their industrial base being hollowed out by Asian nations slowly and slowly and slowly until we are left in a place where we are just purely consumer-based economies, where we are not building anything, where we are not adding value in anything, even in areas where we have the capacity to do so, even in areas where we have done so in the past. So instead of this obsession that people have with artificial intelligence and all that other crap, here are the real things that need to be built. Here are the real things: science, engineering, automation, additive manufacturing, high-level manufacturing, creating thousands of jobs. Because once we've brought back 50% of our pharmaceutical manufacturing, of pharmaceutical drugs to be manufactured in South Africa, that will potentially create around 10,000 jobs if I'm including the manufacturing of all the 3 stages, including precursor chemicals and advanced pharmaceutical ingredients. This is to say, let's just say 50% of precursors precursor chemicals are manufactured in South Africa. 50% of advanced pharmaceutical ingredients are manufactured in South Africa, and 50% of the products, of the finished products, medicines, liquid medicines, capsules, and tablets are manufactured in South Africa. That alone can create up to 10,000 jobs. And because of how high tech these things are, the obvious candidates for this would be the Western Cape. It doesn't have to be Cape Town, but Mossel Bay, Georgia, Knysna, Hermanus, or it could be in KZN like Durban and Pietermaritzburg, or in Gauteng, Joburg and Pretoria, because a lot of the provinces wouldn't have the capacity to process precursors, for instance. They wouldn't have the capacity to process advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, and they wouldn't have the capacity to run these high level and high skilled and high tech manufacturing plants there. So only 3 provinces have the capacity to do that, which is Gauteng, KZN, and the Western Cape. And to a certain extent, I suppose Rustenburg could do it as well, but the areas where they can be done with relative ease and without any more large infrastructure investment, it is these 3 provinces of Gauteng, KZN, and the Western Cape. Those are the things where a government that is not asleep on the wheel. Because the easy thing is to say, what are the things that we are consuming every day? Number 1, and number 2, we have the capacity to produce them. That is a good place to start for most of the stuff. If we have the capacity to produce something, and it's something that we are consuming in large numbers, it is non-brainer that we need to look at ways of prioritizing producing it, and produce and create thousands of jobs. Let me know what you think about this one. I'll see you again, friends, on the next one.